Hi, I'm Susan Swain, host of C-SPAN's Q&A, where we spend an hour with nonfiction writers and historians who add context to today's news. On this episode, filmmakers Beth Levison and Jerry Risius discuss their documentary Storm Lake. It's about the Storm Lake Times, a small-town family-run newspaper in Iowa, and its efforts to stay afloat amid shrinking ad revenues and the coronavirus pandemic. In 2017, the newspaper editor Art Cullen was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. Our conversation will begin in just a moment.
We're losing money, and there ain't a thing you can do about it.
Our ads fell off a cliff.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to go borrow money when we could just walk away from it now.
You can change the world through journalism. The reporter is the cornerstone in a functioning democracy.
And without strong local journalism, the fabric of the place becomes frayed.
The prospect of the newspaper not being around terrifies me.
So if we do the right things here, we'll be all right.
So let's get that story.
Beth Levison, that is a bit of the trailer from your new documentary titled Storm Lake. What's the story you're telling?
Well, Storm Lake is about Art Cullen. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and it's about him and his family's efforts to protect their rural Iowan farming town through their biweekly newspaper, the Storm Lake Times, at the very same time that that newspaper hangs on by a thread. So it's really about a family, it's about a newspaper, and it's about a community that are really all sort of precariously on the edge.
Jerry Risius, welcome to the conversation on Q&A. You were director and photography director for the Storm Lake documentary. As a filmmaker, what interested you in this particular story?
Thanks for having us first. And, I grew up in a very small town, maybe an hour and a half away from Storm Lake. So I left Iowa in the mid-'80s, but still really watched things and loved things all Iowa. So when I saw the announcement of the Pulitzers in the spring of 2017, I saw the headline read, Small North Iowa Newspaper Wins Pulitzer Prize. And I immediately looked up Art, and I thought his story was amazing. I saw what he was doing, and then I called him up, and I went out to film with him for an afternoon in that fall of 2017. And I just thought that what they were doing was amazing.
How long did you work on the project altogether?
From the fall of 2017 into this year, so almost 3.5 years. But principal photography was mainly from the spring of 2019 into election of 2020.
And Beth Levison, the University of North Carolina Communication School has been tracking the fate of small newspapers around the country, and a graph that they have suggests that there's been a net loss of nearly 2,200 newspapers in the country since 2004. In general, what are the challenges that they are facing, and is Storm Lake Times any different from what's been happening at newspapers across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to say, when Jerry and I first started making this film, we were not experts per se in the subject material, but we've really learned so much in the process. And one of the things that we have learned is that newspapers across the country are all facing an existential crisis. They're facing this crisis because ad dollars are drying up. People are more inclined to place an online ad or a Facebook ad than an ad in their local newspaper. Main Street is closing down across the country. And so all those sort of mom and pop shops that used to place ads in local newspapers are now gone. And maybe a Costco or a Walmart is less inclined to place an ad in a local newspaper. And people think that they can get their news for free on Facebook or through their Twitter feed, and people are not subscribing. So what made the film such a rich opportunity is that the Storm Lake Times, when we were filming, and now really was and is facing real financial hardship and issues, but the newspaper is not alone. These are struggles that newspapers are facing all across the country. And just a few days ago, Penny Muse Abernathy helmed that division at the Hussman School of Journalism at the University of North Carolina. She spearheaded a lot of those reports about the rise of news deserts, and she's anticipating that as many as another 500 newspapers could close, I believe, in the next year. So I saw her posting about that earlier this week. So the crisis really does remain. Sure, and exacerbated, I'm sure, by the pandemic over the past year and a half. What exactly? Really exacerbated. What is the definition of a news desert? So a news desert is a community that has, that basically doesn't have a local news source. So it's dry of news. There's no news. And Jerry Risius, after working on this project, why did you come to believe that that mattered in the digital age?
Well, it's a way for people to stay engaged in their communities. I think the newspaper, really, the health of a newspaper is equal to the health of the community. So if you don't have a strong newspaper, you don't have a strong community.
Well, let me turn to you again because you're somewhat local to the area. Tell me specifically about the community that Storm Lake Times serves. Where is it in Iowa? How large is it? Give me some of the atmospherics.
Yeah, of course. So Storm Lake is a town of maybe 15,000 people or so. It's hard to tell because it's also heavily populated with an immigrant community. And the immigrant community has come in because of it's a meatpacking plant as well. So Tyson exists there. They have maybe 25 to 3,000 employees that work there that are primarily immigrants. It's rural. It's again up in northwest Iowa. So politically, it's in the 4th district of Iowa. And it also has, it has a lake. So there's a community that thrives, I guess, with the lake, but mostly, it's very rural, lots of farming, lots of agricultural business, and then the meatpacking plant.
And Beth Levison, about the Storm Lake Times in particular, how many days a week does it publish, and what is its circulation like now, and how has it been trending? So the Storm Lake Times publishes its paper version bi-weekly, 2 times a week. They've been doing a great job. They publish a daily newsletter, which is a daily news digest, so that does come out every day. At the time that we were filming, the newspaper had a circulation of 3,000. Thanks to the film, I think the numbers are rising, and also some of the exposure that Art and his team have garnered on their own. But at the time of filming, it had a circulation of 3,000, and they also launched a website, a remodeled website following the film, and I think they're seeing a lot of page views on that. I think you know that number, Jerry. Do you know the website number?
I believe it's around 30. Well, it's above 500 in terms of its digital, 3,000 physical copies. So, in the 3,500 range, maybe. Yeah. And advertisers, between the two of them? Yeah, advertisers support it, I would guess, on the website as well. So that's another venue for them to attract advertisers. As you said at the outset, Jerry, the newspaper is really the centerpiece of Art Cullen, but many family members are involved. So let's turn to a clip from your film where he introduces the other family members and what their roles are.
Feel comfortable saying if it's going to trial or not?
Oh, we're going to trial.
Okay.
Son Tom Cullen, our reporter, lives the job.
Come here.
My wife, Dolores Cullen, is everywhere with Peach the News Hound and the Times Mobile.
This is Ice Out Day, the day when all the ice melts.
My sister-in-law, Mary Cullen, is hunting recipe features.
Isn't that pretty? What are the health benefits of cooking low salt?
A pretty good rule is that an Iowa town will be about as strong as its newspaper and its banks.
And without strong local journalism to tell a community story, the fabric of the place becomes frayed.
The news pages are the heart of the newspaper, and the editorial page is the soul.
My brother, fearless leader John Cullen,
founded the newspaper in 1990 with the belief that honest reporting would attract a crowd.
So Beth Levison, Art Cullen is clearly the rock at the center of the newspaper. I guess a question with the economic challenges, why does he persist? What motivates him personally? Clearly, it's not a financial reward for the family.
As Art says himself, rage. But I think a couple of things, actually. Rage. I think he feels like he has a lot to say. I think he and the family are deeply, deeply committed to the community, and they care deeply that it sustains itself, that it's a healthy place, that it is a welcoming place to immigrants, that it's a vital place. So I think it's, and I think he believes deeply in the role of journalism in a community. And I think he feels like it's not perhaps just his responsibility, but that it's his calling. So
how many roles does he take? How many roles does he take on at the paper?
Well, what's kind of amazing about this newspaper is everybody does a little bit of everything. So Art, he writes the editorials, so 2 editorials a week, and he has a column as well that he writes. Sometimes he'll take photographs. He delivers the newspapers to the local Casey's, to the local grocery store, to the gas station, wherever they sell papers. And he works with his brother John to make sure that the paper stays solvent, while also overseeing his staff of, there are a total of 10, including Peach the news hound. So, yeah, he wears a lot of hats.
And he lays out the graphics, just to throw in.
And he lays out the graphics. Yeah.
It sounds like it's a 7-day-a-week lifestyle.
It is.
It is?
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
So
I think that's what was so amazing, to be honest, making this film, was actually to see how industrious and how busy a local newsroom could be. I think we have this sense that maybe they're just these sleepy operations. And I think it was a surprise to Jerry and me both, just how industrious and how much work there is for a local newspaper to do when they are really reporting on all the things happening in their community.
Jerry Risius, you mentioned that it was the reporting of Art Cullen's Pulitzer Prize in 2017 that really first got your attention to this story. We found the clip of Lee Bollinger, president of Columbia, presenting the Pulitzer to Art Cullen. Let's listen to what the Pulitzer Prize judges had to say about his work.
The Pulitzer Prize for Editorial Writing. For distinguished editorial writing, the test of excellence being clearness of style, moral purpose, sound reasoning, and power to influence public opinion in what the writer conceives to be the right direction using any available journalistic tool, the prize goes to Art Cullen of the Storm Lake Times, Storm Lake, Iowa, for editorials fueled by tenacious reporting, impressive expertise, and engaging writing that successfully challenged powerful corporate agricultural interests in Iowa. Congratulations, Art Cullen.
Jerry Risius, how does he use his editorial page?
He, as they say in the delivery of the prize, he's very tenacious. I think that he, as we were talking earlier, he doesn't believe that it's a 7-day-a-week job. It's his life. So it doesn't matter what time of day it is. If anything is happening, he's going to be there, and his family and this newspaper are going to cover it. He's also a very engaged writer, and I think that he speaks in a very unique voice that's very Northwest Iowan. So when you read it, you feel engaged and that you're actually there in the community with him. So he speaks to his community. He's a part of his community, and he's it's really his life, I think, his life mission to honor that.
Being familiar with the politics of Northwest Iowa, does his editorial point of view match that of the greater community, or is he often a voice of challenging and change?
The latter, definitely. He is, as he describes in Storm Lake. Storm Lake is a blue town in a purple county in a red district or a red state. I think Iowa's going redder and redder over the last decade or so. So I think he challenges big business, he challenges his community to do better and to be engaged. So many times, because people that work for large agribusiness find that he is perhaps less than favorable or for what their livelihoods might be. So sometimes he's very much at odds with the community.
There are several themes that run throughout your film in addition to the economics of the newspaper, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time exploring them after you both spent so much time with the newspaper and in that region of the country. First, with the rural economy in general. We heard Lee Bollinger mention that the paper has taken on the big business of agribusiness, corporate agribusiness. So what did you learn about the impact of agribusiness in the rural communities like Storm Lake? Beth?
Well, I can say a little bit. Okay. I grew up on a farm in an area very close to Storm Lake, and my father, for example, raised a family of 4 kids on an acreage of 160 acres, which is essentially a quarter section or a quarter mile, and that has changed. I mean, we are now living in an agricultural state where everything has become vertically integrated since the 90s. And so, farmers do not own their animals anymore. They basically are leasing out space to large agribusiness, in this case, in Storm Lake, in Tyson's. There are others, smaller plants as well around, but they're definitely, pockmarked all over the state. So it really has become a different business. And as maturing capitalism grows, you just see mergers. And so you, as Art says, you either get big or get out. So I think that's been a challenge to try to keep the local communities populated, because people are leaving, myself included. I left in 1984 and still continue to watch what happens in Iowa, but I'm part of the diaspora who's actually left. So, it's a totally different landscape, and people are trying to understand how to move forward and to keep their families and communities alive and still make a living.
Beth Levison, what your thoughts on what you observed?
Well, if I can just add to that, I thought, Jerry, you just nailed it. And but with those economic and agribusiness and changes in agribusiness, there's also really been demographic changes as a result. So Jerry sort of spoke to part of it, which is that so many have left, but who's come in? Immigrants, and a lot of folks, primarily a lot of folks from Mexico, from Latin America, but not just from there and from Micronesia. That's what makes Storm Lake so interesting. So people have come from all over the world to work in Iowa, and in these meatpacking plants. And so it's, I think, I just want to say how sort of interwoven it all is, how the economic changes, what we saw, how they brought demographic changes, and how the demographic changes result in political discord and climate issues. And I think that was something for us that was really fascinating to explore in the film, that interconnectedness, that these aren't standalone issues, but how deeply interwoven they are.
Our next clip from your film is actually on climate change, and we're going to meet a farmer by the name of Big John. Let's watch.
We're going to suburban Sulphur Springs, Iowa, Providence Township, the home of John Snyder, Big John, plumber and farmer. I'm mainly interested in when did he plant corn? How did he cope with the spring weather, which was torrents of rain? Wow, this would be a picture like we've never seen, John.
It's just barely knee high now. We had one day on May 4th.
For corn.
For planting, yeah. And then we got rained out till the 15th and 16th of May. We had 2 days. We didn't get back until June 2nd.
Have you ever seen it this wet in the spring before?
No, never. Not in my lifetime. Usually you get out end of April.
Right.
They were usually done by May 10th.
What do you figure you'd get knocked off in your yield? What did you get last year on corn?
Oh, probably 225, probably.
What would you guess you'll get this year? Take a wild-ass guess.
150. I don't know. If you say 150, then everything after that's better.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, that's gravy. It's gravy on top of your taters.
Gravy on top of your taters. Jerry Risius, let me ask you, since you're familiar with the topography, you stood in that field, I presume, alongside Art as he was taking pictures, taking your own film. What is your reaction to what you visibly saw about the crops and the impact of climate change on them?
A bit of a mixed bag, I have to say. So very, very short crops, and you kind of gauge a lot of what your yields might be based on where you think you're going to be kind of mid-season, and that's usually the 4th of July is how you break that up. But then when we heard a lot of the stories, and Art had done this story over the years, but mostly as a family story of like how tall Big John's son was as he grew up through the years. And most of the time, when I grew up, say in the 70s and 80s in Iowa, the standard was knee high by the 4th of July. And now it's actually, if it's not shoulder high or almost like 6 foot height, you're actually underperforming. Your yields would be, but now watching what happened, the spring of 2019. Seeing all the issues that farmers were having just getting their crops planted was a big deal. And that was something that Art was reporting on. Now, there was a bit of a recovery for the farmers, thank goodness, through the fall. So they had different yields in different seasons. So there was a bit of a mixed blessing. People in different parts of the state, it's very sort of micro pocketed depending on where your weather falls. So some farmers did all right, and some didn't do so well.
Mm. Beth, any other thoughts on the economic impact of climate change?
I think Jerry kind of covered it. I guess what I just want to add is that I'm not sure folks can really imagine it is the other piece. These cornfields and the monoculture of cornfields and soybean fields truly stretch as far as the eye can see. And Jerry and I drove a lot around Iowa, and you just see cornfield after cornfield after cornfield. And that is resulting, and Jerry could also probably speak to this a little bit better because he's done a film about soil. But, what that means for the soil, what that means for the ecology, how that contributes to climate change. There's just so many levels to all this. And there's a way in which it seems very romantic at first when you see all this industrialized corn and soybean. But at a certain point, perhaps it starts to seep in, like what that really means, that monoculture.
I wonder if it also speaks to the local journalism angle again, and how really knowing the area and knowing the crops and the impact of the crops and the local economy makes you report on them differently than someone might from a distant place just looking at numbers.
For sure.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, go, Jerry.
No, I was just going to say, very true. Art grew up with Big John. They were friends. It was, Art grew up in town, and John was a farmer, and he used to have, kids sleepovers and play dates out at John's farm. So these two that we see in their 60s, grew up as teenagers in Storm Lake together. So it's very, it's not 50, 60 years they've spent together as friends, and so having that and knowing so well your community, I think, speaks to what art and local journalism does. It really was like a very tightly integrated newspaper into the community there.
Mm. So, Beth Levison, you spoke about the interplay of the various issues, and immigration was the next one on my list. We have a clip of a town hall meeting that Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley had with local residents, covered by Tom Cullen, the Art's son, and we're going to watch that next. So it's just about a minute long.
As we know about Storm Lake, it's heavily reliant on immigration. What's your sense on that? What do you tell people in Storm Lake who are afraid?
I don't think you have to be afraid unless you're violating the law. But as a practical matter, wasn't there a figure out a couple weeks ago that there could be 100,000 people deported? Mm-hmm. Well, think, 100,000 out of 11 million people?
Yeah.
So why would you have to be very concerned?
I mean, if you're undocumented here in town, and let's just be real, there are undocumented people here in town. I would be very afraid if Trump admits through tweet that we're going to deport tens of millions of people.
Well,
and I understand the news media debunked a little bit of that.
I get your point. We got people in Congress that think you can line up 11 million people and get out of the country. That's not the real world, and I'm not telling anybody that.
Yeah, okay.
You've never heard me say that.
No.
The only thing you've heard me say about legalization is we can't take care of that issue until we convince the people that we secure the border. And listen, you know how many people on the right would be irritated with what I just told you that I'd even be thinking about that.
Yeah.
Beth Levison, as the director of this film, how did you cover the issue of immigration as it's seen through the eyes of Storm Lake?
I think we really we made a decision with this film that we wanted to reveal the community and the newspaper in as intimate a way as possible. So we really didn't resort to statistics and big numbers. We really wanted to tell human stories. So the way that we chose the story to tell the story of immigration in this community is, we told the story of Emmanuel Trujillo, who is a Mexican immigrant who works in the local Tyson food plant and becomes a singing star on a reality show. And, we just covered Dolores as she gets a tip about his story and then goes to meet him at his home, where she learns about him and viewers learn about him. And we put a face to Emmanuel Trujillo. And we also did that through, it's really interesting, actually. Today, Art published an editorial about another young man who had grown up in Storm Lake, but he was, and his family worked in the plant, and how they were deported and what that meant for a community. So we sort of chose to tell this story through these through stories that the paper was telling them itself, or that the Cullens were. And then we also just tried to bring it in other ways. So what's incredible about Storm Lake, I mean, this was an unforgettable, like it almost made me cry in the moment, was they have a 4th of July parade. And as a part of that parade, they have the Parade of Nations, where people from all over the world, there's the Honduran float, and there's the Mexican float, there's the Micronesian float, there's the Laotian float. I mean, and just you see ethnic group after ethnic group kind of going through the parade. So, we showed that population that way. And then, certainly later in the film, when we cover the Iowa caucuses, in one of the caucus locations, it was 95% Latinx people. And so that was a real opportunity to show, who calls this community home.
Jerry Risius, I thought of you in preparation for this about that 4th of July parade as director of photography and the images. What did those particular images, how did they speak to you, and why you wanted to include them in the final cut of the film?
Oh, when we got there, just as Beth said, it was so jaw-dropping, to be in rural North Iowa. I mean, as the beginning of what Art describes as his childhood, he grew up in a town that was, 99.9% white. So within one generation, to see such a transition into such a wide net of ethnic groups that come into, your town was inspiring. And welcoming. I mean, I know that there are people that, may not be so thrilled as the Cullens or as some people are in the community. But by and large, I think, Storm Lake is a success story. They need immigrants. They have, businesses that need labor, and the immigrants supply that. So, I mean, it really is a situation where, there's a need. The newspaper welcomes them. The newspaper writes stories about them. They're your neighbors. Also, I think Art at one point says, it's hard to hate people that are your neighbors. So if these people are your neighbors and you're interacting with them, and we were at the Cullens several times when neighborhood kids would just like walk in the front door. They just felt free to come in and out. So, it's quite awe-inspiring to me, actually. And then on the 4th of July, to be able to film that, it was very nice. I actually really loved it.
Yeah.
Beth Levison, returning to the economics of the newspaper, one would imagine that a large percentage of the migrant population are not English speakers. So the Storm Lake Times is an English language publication. How does that add to their economic concerns?
I think it has an impact. I think that they have a growing immigrant population that doesn't, exactly as you say, doesn't necessarily read English, and they have an English language newspaper. Something that was really satisfying for us was that we could include the story of La Prensa in the film. So in Northwest Iowa, there is a Spanish language newspaper called La Prensa. It's published by a woman named Lorena Lopez. It's almost a one-woman operation. It's heroic what she's doing. But it was a real opportunity for us to show, when we think about local news, I think some of us think monolithically. We think, okay, this is the community's newspaper. But what's really important to think about is that in all of our communities, we might have religious communities. We might have non-English speaking communities. So what we really wanted to do, and what the story of La Prensa allowed us to do, was to show the value of these other newspapers in a community, the value of a Spanish language newspaper. And our hope is that with the film that we can elevate other kinds of community newspapers, whether it's Spanish language or historically Black owned, or sort of you name it. But it's just so important. It was important for us to show that not every newspaper necessarily speaks for its own community, and that some communities need their own newspaper to speak for them and to reflect them.
You referenced the Iowa caucus, and you were there during the election year, including the caucus season. And in the film, we see how this brings attention to Art Cullen. He's on national news as a commentator, moderates candidates' debates with national candidates. We're going to watch caucus night, which the whole country will remember was a very challenging night for Iowa and the presidential process. Let's see what it looked like in the Storm Lake Times newsroom.
These pictures from precinct sites all over Iowa tonight where Joe Biden, in some of them, has not been viable. Why is that important? Because the Biden campaign has been saying for a long time that they believe they're one of the few campaigns that would be viable across the state. That yes, they may not be as strong in the more populated areas like Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Davenport.
Joe Biden,
they do think they would be able to run up
viable.
the score in more rural areas. And I have to say, Brian, we've been covering just about every single Biden event there is over the last few months here in Iowa. A lot of the places we go, the best dining option is probably a Casey's General Store. So these are rural areas, and so we should consider that tonight.
All right, Mike Memoli at Biden headquarters, where they officially know nothing.
From Iowa.
What are you hearing?
We're all trying to figure out here in New York why we don't have any results and where the hang-up may be.
I've never seen anything like it.
Oh, hell. Every election is like this.
I can tell you the Iowa Democratic Party now isn't saying anything.
It's not 10 o'clock yet.
Yeah. I think AP's got a projection coming out.
And a general election, you won't get the results until midnight.
Yeah.
It's not 10 o'clock yet.
Yeah. Has it ever been in your experience?
No, of course not.
I like
Sometimes you won't get the results till the next day.
Yeah.
The Iowa Democratic Party further endearing Iowa to the Democratic Party.
Jeez.
Well, I know it's going to raise more questions for sure.
Joe, that's
Those that are doing that.
what a load of crap.
I'll be curious about. There's the process questions. Is this the way we should, nominate a president? Iowa Democratic Party has put a statement out. Thank you, my dear.
Let's hear this.
We've experienced a delay in the results due to the fact that the Iowa Democratic Party is reporting out 3 data sets for the first time.
Yeah, true
enough.
Yeah.
But regardless, we've only got the explanation. We still don't have any digits.
Everybody's saying it's going to kill the Iowa caucuses,
Yeah.
this delay. It shouldn't, but it will.
Jerry Risius, of course, it wasn't business as usual this time around, and 2 caucuses in a row with reporting data problems. What does the caucus really mean to Iowa and to rural communities like Storm Lake?
Well, I think a lot. Iowa has a really outsized role, I think, in national politics because they do come first. The one positive I think that we get at the end of at least Art's opinion, having watched what they went through, and certainly then the evening of the reporting, is that it's a chance for neighbors who may not necessarily agree with each other to sit down at the same table and have a discussion about issues, which I think is something that's really, America is moving farther and farther away from. Like, we don't sit and talk to people that we don't really agree with anymore. So, and that we were very, very happy to report on because, Iowa is a flyover state. And I think that, they appreciate the attention. Art, by virtue of winning the Pulitzer Prize, I think got the attention of a lot of candidates. So people would come to town to talk to him about what their issues were and to try to bring their message to Iowa. So I think Art, and certainly Storm Lake and that particular area or the district that they're in, appreciated the attention, because I think that's one thing that they think that will allow them to to tell their stories and to be seen on a larger scale. And I think that's important for them.
Beth Levison, have you ever experienced an Iowa caucus before? What was it like for you?
It was so moving, to be honest. And there were scenes that we shot that we were not able to include in the film of really people disagreeing, but in such a, collegial way. And, one person who was, advocating for Elizabeth Warren, trying to get an Amy Klobuchar person over. I mean, it was just so to see that kind of exchange, which is really something that we're not seeing now. We're so polarized, and also it's just such a process that that is sort of unique to Iowa and these states where there are caucuses, and so. It was just incredible to have a front row seat. I think the newsroom, and I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, was also a whole other experience, which was just so interesting that night.
Tell me why.
So I think because I don't know if you sort of caught it, but so that night we knew that the caucuses were supposed to go until 10 o'clock. Jerry and I thought that we were going to be shooting until 10 o'clock. But by 9 o'clock, people go to bed early in Iowa or whatever, but the caucuses, were largely over. And so the Cullens had gone back to the newsroom. So it's 9:15 and we're in the newsroom and we're already hearing how cable news is saying that that the Iowa caucuses are a failure, are a disaster. As Art says, it's not 10 o'clock yet. And it made me realize that if I had been watching cable news from my living room in New York City, I would have just assumed Iowa's a mess, this process is a mess. And even though things did go wrong, there's something incredibly valuable happening through this kind of exchange, happening between people who might not agree with one another. And it kind of showed the way in which local news was just trying to cover what was really happening on the ground. And it kind of became, I hate to say it, but sort of not a salacious, but, a moment that cable news could really jump on and inflate. And so to see that contrast really made me think about that value of local news and what happens when we're only getting news from sources that have a hardcore economic bottom line and are fighting for eyeballs and are willing to kind of proclaim crisis before it necessarily is a crisis.
Jerry Risius, you were nodding your head during that. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I guess the short answer is that we were there, watching the Cullen team and the Cullen family cover all this, and it was truly amazing. We were we're watching people discuss the issues, discuss the candidates, and then to go back and then hear them and watch their reactions as well. I mean, they felt, okay, we're a flyover state, but like what we say is important. But then they're watching, the Tom and Dolores and Art are watching this news reporting on Iowa. So they're taking it also very personally, right? Because this is what they do. And then to have their work basically just be kind of marginalized by, some forms that the Iowa Democratic Party had sort of put out really puts them in a position of trying to respond or trying to defend what their role is in politics is. So it was an interesting front row seat, and I agree totally with Beth as well, is that there was a lot of drama that was being kind of churned by some of the more politically slanted television programs.
So a couple of weeks really after the Iowa caucus, we began to learn about the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's the last big issue I wanted to put on the table that plays out in your film. Let's watch a minute-long clip of the Storm Lake Times coverage of the COVID-19 outbreak at the Tyson's plant. And this was an issue all across the Midwest in meatpacking plants as the workers were vulnerable and still trying to feed the nation at the same time. Let's watch.
We were the first ones to actually come to press and say a number of Tyson employees tested positive. And then there was this dramatic spike of cases in Storm Lake. It was just unbelievable. We're continuing to report on the numbers as best we can, but we never really know the exact count on a given day. And that's really incumbent upon the State Department of Public Health and the governor's office, of course, to enlighten us on that. But, they haven't responded to a single email of mine.
Now, Storm Lake is the hottest spot in Iowa, one of the top 10 in the country. They decided late last week to shut down the Tyson Pork Complex for a few days at least for cleaning after these test results showed that over 20% of the Tyson pork plant roster had COVID.
Obviously, this aspect of the story impacted the community. It impacted the newspaper's ability to do their business, and both of you in being able to continue your filming. So walk me through those first couple of months of the pandemic and what happened.
Yeah. I mean, when, of course, the entire world just flipped on its end, I think, during the beginning days and the beginning weeks of COVID and the pandemic. But we also, we both spoke daily, regularly, because we were all isolating in our homes and trying to figure out that this is a real, opportunity for us, but also very important for the newspaper in its coverage, because it really was going to be saving lives. I mean, the newspaper was going to be reporting on what is happening. And I think then what we see through Tom's reporting is that they were not getting transparent information. They were not, and certainly it was very difficult for any state and for any place to try to understand what was happening. But we then were able to continue filming. I'm a cinematographer, so I have equipment in my basement. So we continued to do a series, almost weekly or bi-weekly series of interviews with all of the Cullens throughout, I'd say from, March into June. And we followed what was happening, and we had those intermixed with the actual newspaper reporting itself. So we then got all the newspapers, filmed their headlines and their stories, and then took advantage of having Dolores Cullen, who's a great photographer there, actually photograph some of the empty streets and to show actually what was happening in Storm Lake. So we weren't able to go back to Storm Lake, but through the mixture of those different storylines, we were able to tell the story of what they were doing and how important it was.
Beth Levison, what was your experience in this part of the production?
Well, this was, there were moments where we thought, is this a crisis for our film? Because we can't go back out there. But we really realized that it was an opportunity for the newspaper to really tell its own story. So if this is a film about the role of a newspaper in a community, okay, this is its, kind of key moment. So we did conduct these interviews, and we did have Dolores film a little bit at home, but we also used this as an opportunity to really drill into the newspaper. And so it was a huge writing exercise because we had the interviews, but we really wanted to tell the story through the headlines, through the pictures, through the copy. And so, so it was just, we had to sort of change our approach to the filmmaking in this moment, but it was also an opportunity to actually go deeper into all the themes that we had been developing from the outset. So, once we knew that the film was going to COVID, it also really informed everything that came prior to that. And I guess I just want to add that, something we really wanted to do in the making of this film was to bring the newspaper to life in sort of a vital way, in 3D, if you will. And, we've all seen so many films where we, scan the headlines and they're 2D. But this is like a living, breathing thing that reflects a living, breathing community. And so, it was just a moment where we wanted to bring it even more to life and really show its vitality and its necessity. And, if you see the movie on a big screen, you'll see the threads in the paper and the smudging of the ink. And so, so we really wanted to kind of crystallize a lot of the aspects of the film in that moment.
We have a little less than 15 minutes left in our hour with you. And Jerry Risius, to that end, and the images, a very striking image for me in the film is watching print newspapers come off the presses. And and also watching Art drive in his car around to small stores and deliver stacks of papers, and then come pick up unsold papers, a day or so later. And one has to scratch your head in the digital age and worry about the environment and consumption of energy and all of this. How small newspapers really do overcome those challenges.
Well, I think they're trying to figure that out. I have to say, you just made me think of a great production story, which is that, really early on, I think the first day that I went out to film with Art, that first afternoon, I went out with him to deliver newspapers. I did a little bit of character building reel footage, I guess, that I was trying to construct. And then he went out to deliver newspapers. And we got to the third or fourth place along the way, and he was going to go into a cafe, and he says, yeah, don't bother coming in because there really won't be anything happening. And certainly there was nobody inside. So he walked in, and I said, let me follow you in. I walked in with him, and he had 10 newspapers to deliver. He plopped his 10 down, and he looked down. He pulled out the styrofoam cup, which is an honorarium system that people that will pick up a newspaper will hopefully drop a $1 bill in. And he pulled out 7 single-dollar bills. And then I realized, to your question earlier, what else does Art do? It sounds like he does everything. He delivers the papers. And at this point, he's taking single-dollar bills out of a styrofoam cup to try to make his monthlies. And I realized this is like a real economic crisis. I mean, getting back to your question about like what do we, how does this business model move forward? It has to figure out its way forward because it really is a dying business. I have a 24-year-old daughter. Like, she doesn't read the newspaper. I'm not sure if the next generation is actually going to be as news savvy. And so, I think it's a responsibility hopefully for us and for, journalists to try to engage that generation and try to make sure that they stay informed. And I think that's going to be a difficult part of moving forward.
So, Beth Levison, in the time we have left, I want to move to your hopes for this film and what it will do to spur conversation in local communities. You've got a website for the film, and there's a section of it that's an action plan. One of those is to sponsor a showing in your own local community. There's quite a list of them. You've participated in some of those personally. What happens when people watch the film? What kind of dialogue goes on?
Well, so our hope with the film, we wanted to tell a story about the Cullens, the Storm Lake Times, Storm Lake, Iowa, but we really wanted to tell a story that would resonate more broadly. And so with our impact campaign, we're really hoping that the film encourages people to rethink their relationship to local news. Do they subscribe to their local news? Are they local business owners? Do they place ads in the newspaper? Are they civically engaged? And so what's been really amazing is when we have these community screenings, there have been times, I'll just share, we recently screened the film. It was a festival screening, but at the Hamptons International Film Festival, and we had a Q&A, and David Rattray, the editor of the East Hampton Star, moderated and was asking me questions. And what was incredible was when at a certain point we stopped talking about the movie and the audience started asking David Rattray questions. Are the struggles that the Cullens are having, do those resonate with you? Are you seeing a slip in advertising? And then to see the community start to understand their own newspaper and to give the newspaper an opportunity to have a conversation with their community, whether people in the audience are subscribers or not, has just been really incredible. So, we're having screenings that involve the local newspaper as much as possible, but we're also screening the film with organizations who are really committed to sustaining the future of local news, creating new opportunities for local philanthropy. And so it's just been really incredible to see how the film gets people to even see their local newspaper. One thing that's unique about Art, he has an incredible voice. He's brilliant, great writer. But what he also does is he shares the story of their struggle with the community. And so many newspapers don't do that. They may tell the stories as best they can of their community, but they don't tell the stories of their own struggle. So people just have no idea. So for us to surface this reality and to bring about not just conversation, but action, so that people might step forward and take a vested interest in this pillar of their community, we're seeing that, and it's just really exciting. And, we had an impact campaign that we were sort of going to maybe start to slow down at the end of this year, but there's a lot of work to do, and we're going to keep going deep into 2022.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Jerry Risius, I'm wondering about whether or not you feel that this has become a cause more than a filmmaking project for you.
Very funny. We started out, literally, I saw the headlines of that Pulitzer Prize announcement, and I thought this would make a great film. And then as we went out to Storm Lake, Beth and I realized that, Art is an amazing character, but it's really an ensemble piece. And so we, the story just kept on growing, and then all the issues that we wanted to help tell, we were trying to figure out where they would all lie, where, if they would find their lanes or their channels or how they would actually line up. But it actually, all of these stories became baked in to the actual reporting that the Storm Lake Times were doing. So, in a certain way, we had no idea what we were getting into when we started, and all these issues that are important to us, like, we were very happy to tell. And then slowly we also started learning that the issues of journalism are so real, because I think what Beth said before is that, the many newspapers around the country don't know how to tell their own story. They tell stories about the communities, but Art, in fact, his storytelling about their struggles actually allowed us to get into that. So I think, it has become a cause. It's a cause that I think that both Beth and I are behind and really want to push. And I think the more people that we talk to as we go to do these screenings and we go to different festivals, we realize that there is a real impact. There are communities that, are completely unaware of what's happening to their newspapers. So, it's been I think for that a success, and we just hope to keep on pushing it into the new year and beyond.
If we've intrigued people, Beth Levison, there'll also be an opportunity nationally to see your film on PBS. Can you explain when?
Yeah, so the film is going to be on national PBS stations as part of the Independent Lens series on Monday, November 15th at 10 o'clock, but check your local listings.
And how does, this is not an inexpensive venture to spend all this time making the film in the first place, post-production, and now all of these screenings and community sessions around the country. How does a project like this get financed?
Well, I spent 3 hours this morning writing a fundraising email this morning. So we are constantly fundraising, and we have, the film was made possible in part through ITVS, which is the Independent Television Video Service. But we also had we were supported by the Ford Foundation and film funds, Catapult Film Fund, and individuals. And so now at this stage, once again, we are really seriously fundraising. And it's interesting because, I've been producing films for many years, and there's a circle of film funders. We're having to go the next concentric circle out to really, who are those individuals and organizations that are really invested in the future of local news. And I guess I just want to piggyback on one thing that Jerry said. The reason this has become a cause, and I think this is something we came to understand in a way that we really did not before we started filming, and that we hope that people see in the movie, is that it's not just about news. It's not just about what's going on in your community. It's the way in which local news is so critical to a functioning democracy and an informed electorate. We just had these elections. I was on my Twitter feed, and I caught this one post by someone saying, I really didn't know what, how to vote, because I just wasn't aware that these things were coming up. So I just circled yes. The local news is telling us what's coming up in our communities, what decisions have to be made around zoning or vis-a-vis schools or local laws. So this idea, we think about it as news, but it's not just news. It is a pillar of our democracy. And I think that once Jerry and I really started to understand that deeply, we were like, this is really important. And that may have been when it tilted over from a film to more of a cause.
Well, that's it for our time. Jerry Risius, Beth Levison, thank you for spending an hour with C-SPAN to talk about your film, your documentary, Storm Lake. We're going to close, not giving away all of it, but just a little glimpse of the same way that you closed the film, and that is Art Cullen in an editorial he wrote to his son about the importance of journalism.
Dear Tom, when James Madison wrote the First Amendment to the Constitution, he had you in mind. The reporter is the cornerstone of an informed electorate and a functioning democracy.
So is it one per house then?
Yeah.
One of each per house.
Yep. The best journalism is that which builds communities. You build your community by publicizing good deeds done,
hey guys,
by urging yourself and those around you to do better.
What? How are you? Doing good?
And by making certain that your town's issues are heard in Des Moines and Washington. Tyranny prevails whenever the press is not free. Stand guard.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Q&A, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're there, please take a minute to rate and review us. You can also send us an email about Q&A at podcasts@c-span.org. Send me your questions, your comments, or ideas. Your feedback is welcome.